Hi there, and thanks for watching this video. Glad to have you with us wherever you might be in the world. I'm Mark Horler, and I'm the founder and chairman of UK Urban Agritech, or UKUAT for short. We're a cross-industry member network devoted to promoting urban agritech as a solution for food and environmental crises. We work collaboratively across a number of pre-competitive spaces, including policy, education, and the exchange of knowledge and expertise. Like many people in these challenging times, we've been putting together a series of webinars and video presentations to help set out what we do and why. Now, often in the urban agritech industry, those conversations tend to center around the technical and the economic, and that's a good and necessary thing. But we should always be asking ourselves why we're doing this. What are we doing it for? And what are we trying to achieve? These basic principles should underlie everything that we do, because we're working with food, and food is such a fundamental part of our societies and our lives. If we don't do that, then we risk losing sight of what really matters and missing opportunities to make things better. We might reasonably call this the social context, and it's that topic which brings us here today. I'm delighted to be joined today by Florence Pardoe. Florence works in public engagement for Bristol Food Network and youth engagement for the Food Foundation. She's also a director of Grown It, a startup education enterprise also based in Bristol. Florence, welcome.
Hi, Mark.
Tell us a little bit more about your work before we get started.
Great, thank you. Well, yes, so my startup, Grown It, works with schools primarily, but also with businesses to bring fun, hands-on, informative education around food, to inspire and empower people to really take a role in creating a more sustainable and just food system.
All right, brilliant. Well, clearly that's the topic we want to address today, and I'm excited to hear your presentation. So without further ado, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. As I mentioned, my ambition is to inspire and empower people to take part in changing our system. Food should nourish us and bring us joy, and instead we found ourselves in a situation where food is one of the leading causes of death and one of the leading causes of destruction of our planet. I believe in using food to bring people together to imagine how things could be done differently and to explore how we can innovate and collaborate to move towards a more just and sustainable food future. Our food system is failing in many ways, and one of the consequences of that is food insecurity. So as Mark mentioned, that's what we're going to be focusing on today and considering what role urban agritech has to play in addressing those inequalities. So I'm going to share my screen with you now and take you through a little presentation that's going to put some context around the issues and then lead us into exploring how urban agritech can maybe help address those issues. So I'm going to start by painting a rather stark picture on where we are today. So we live in a world where we have nearly 1 billion people hungry and 1 billion people overweight or obese. Here in the UK, unhealthy food is 3 times as cheap as healthy food. All across the city, we have growing urban populations, and within these populations, food deserts are becoming more commonplace. So these are large urban areas where there is no or very little access to fresh and healthy food. Of all of the food that we produce worldwide, 1/3 is going in the bin. COVID has, of course, worsened the situation around food insecurity in most of the world. Here in the UK, we now have 4.9 million adults and 1.7 million children experiencing food insecurity. In the first 6 months of this year, 2,500 children were submitted to hospital with malnutrition in the UK. And as well, we have a growing mental health crisis, and we know that diet in early years and access to green space are both crucial factors in having good mental health. So it's a multifaceted problem. I'd next like to briefly consider the terms we use around food inequality to put it into a wider social context. So when we talk about food insecurity, we might also call it food poverty. Food poverty is simply poverty. Food insecurity is a very nuanced way to talk about a specific area of poverty, but if you're facing food insecurity, you are struggling financially, and this will be affecting every area of your life. So it's really important to remember that when we talk about food insecurity or food poverty, what we're talking about is poverty. And poverty is a systemic political issue which is based in wealth inequality, lack of a living wage and of job security, and an insufficient welfare system. And this inequality is injustice. It's not a fair situation. Now we speak about climate justice, and we also speak about food justice, which to me is a really important term. Now, as we know, food plays a huge part in climate. And just as the causes and effects of climate change, of our failing food system are inextricably linked, so are the solutions. And we should approach them as much as possible in a holistic way. And then we are much more likely to create genuine, sustained equality. I'd also just like to consider current solutions to food insecurities. So primarily at the moment, these take the form of food banks, which rely on redistribution of surplus supermarkets food. Now, these cannot and should not be a solution to food inequality, but only a stopgap measure. The approach of redistributing surplus food only legitimizes wasteful practices and does nothing to address a system where supermarket workers and even farmers are having to turn to food banks. There will always be surplus within a food system, and we should absolutely find ways to prevent this going to waste, but allowing these solutions to become entrenched and relied upon is leading us down a very dangerous path. Real equality will only come where individuals and communities are able to access a sufficient amount of nutritious food without having to rely on charity. So within our suite of potential solutions to food insecurity, let's consider the role that urban farming has to play. So we might be talking about backyard farming, about allotments, about community growing projects, about large-scale urban growing and commercial growing, and of course, urban agritech. Now, of course, growing food in cities brings a not insignificant amount of food into the city, but there's lots and lots of value around urban growing just beyond food. So let's consider some of these. Of course, we have access to fresh food, which is a very important part of growing food in a city. But also we are introducing food growing skills and learning around nutrition, around healthy food systems, and around cooking. And now these two, fresh food and growing skills, are particularly important in creating resilience in local food supplies in times of disruption to supply or to prices, such as we've seen during this pandemic, and we are likely to see in the future when we are suffering the consequences of climate-related disruption. So that resilience of food systems is really important. And of course, growing food in cities, when we're talking about resilience, we can also talk about climate change resilience. So greening our cities can help mitigate some of the effects of climate change. It can keep our cities cooler. It can keep our cities less prone to flooding. And of course, it is going to be a carbon sink. Another really important part of urban food growing is the creation of community, which is often something that is lacking in our cities. Community food growing is, of course, great for those who have no growing space, and it can be a real lifeline for people who are struggling perhaps with their mental health or with addiction problems, and it can really be a very powerful way to prevent people from falling further into crisis. And of course, what follows from that is the benefit to our physical and mental health around food growing. I'm sure anyone who's ever grown any food can also pay testament to the advantages there. And again, linked to mental health is the sense of sovereignty and autonomy that food growing gives us. And I think that is a really, really important one, and one that we shouldn't overlook. Having that sense of sovereignty, that sense of control over what you're putting into your body and in terms of your future is very, very important if you're going to believe that systemic change is possible. I recently published a blog on the Grown It website around the benefits of urban growing. So there's a link to that below, and I would encourage you to go and have a read of that. There's some really interesting links in there as well if you'd like to explore the benefits of urban growing further. So what role has urban agritech got to play? How can we help find meaningful solutions to food insecurity using these types of urban growing technology? Now, the two main areas to me, which we're going to explore today, are growing in communities and in education. By growing in communities, I mean bringing growing technologies into communities to provide fresh produce, whether it's by hydroponic green walls, urban mushroom farming, or rooftop grow houses. And we're going to consider a couple of examples here. So first of all, we're going to go to Oklahoma, and we've got a couple of hydroponic grow units here. These are at the Community Food Bank of Eastern Oklahoma, and these 2 units grow 1,800 heads of lettuce every 45 days. Now, they are not cheap. They cost $140,000 for the 2 units, and they cost $680 a month to run, and they were purchased with some funding. I crunched some numbers, and just to pay off the 2 units without considering how much they cost to run, it would buy lettuce for about 7 years to pay off those 2 units. So there are questions over the financial sense that it makes to put a project like this in a food bank, but we also need to consider the long-term societal savings of bringing nutrient-dense food into a community, improving people's mental health through growing, and the potential environmental benefit of not shipping lettuce to Oklahoma in the winter months. So it's an interesting model potentially, and the people who come to the food bank in Eastern Oklahoma absolutely love getting involved in growing these lettuces. Next up, we're going to consider a case in New York. So you can see on top of this building here, we have a greenhouse. This is on top of a New York City Housing Association low-income green housing building. This is in the Bronx, in a very poor area of New York City. And the building was constructed by a green architecture firm who installed this, built this greenhouse on top as well. And it's a commercially run hydroponic farm. So it's run by Sky Greens. They sell their greens commercially mainly to restaurants, but a percentage of the produce is put aside as a community-supported agriculture scheme and sold to the residents and to the locals for an affordable price. So it's not really integrated into the community in that the community are involved in growing the food, but they do benefit from having this hyper-local, nutrient-dense food right above them. Next up, I'd like to look at the benefits in education. So we have here the Green Bronx machine. This is also in the Bronx, in the poorest congressional district in the entire United States. And the man you see at the back there is Stephen Ritz. He started growing food in his classroom, sort of by accident. He's a great man, really great storyteller. And he was the first teacher in the States to use these hydroponic tower gardens to teach his kids about growing food and nutrition. And it's really taken off. The school is amazing, and the amount of food that they're now growing outside in outdoor growing spaces. And he has created a huge curriculum, which is now being used by schools all over the country and across the world as well. And they look at art and science and maths and engineering, all sorts. It's fantastic. Since Stephen set this classroom up, they have seen attendance increase from 40 to 94% in targeted students. They have generated 2,200 local jobs for students in the area. They have seen a 45% increase in pass rate, and they've seen weight loss, diet improvement, reduced food waste in their school canteen. It's a really inspiring project. I interviewed Stephen when I visited his classroom a couple of years ago, and there is a podcast of that interview on the Grown It blog as well. So I would encourage you to listen to that. He's a very inspiring man. And we're going to go just around the corner now to Teens for Food Justice. They're also based in the Bronx. And Teens for Food Justice work with high schools, and they build with the students working commercial hydroponic farms in the colleges and in schools. And the children learn not just about growing food, but they learn about engineering, they learn about food justice and advocacy, and they also then sell the produce themselves. So they're learning about entrepreneurship and business management. It's fantastic. And they have a super quote on their website, which I'd like to share with you. Our young urban farmers experience the rewards of building a meaningful, working solution to food insecurity in their communities. In the process, they transform their relationship to the food they eat while developing the science and technology skills needed in a new green sector economy. So a few pretty impressive examples from the States there, but what about here in the UK? Well, in our next session, we are going to be chatting to some members of UKUAT who are either exploring or are already working to address food insecurity in their communities. And I'm really looking forward to that session. You can register for your place on the link below. And you're also welcome to submit your questions to us. And there's explanations in the blurb below about how to do that. I'm looking forward to seeing what has come up from you from this session. And Mark, what about you? What questions have come up for you?
Well, yeah, thanks for us. I mean, that was really interesting and really important. And I think the thing that keeps jumping out at me is that food is kind of, you know, at the bottom of this kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And through projects like Stephen Ritz's project and all of these, you can see that food is such a basic thing that it underpins so many other areas, and we can make progress, and it's holding us back. And I think, you know, I guess that's not a question, but it's hopefully what we intend to address in this other topic is how do we improve that in the UK such that we can achieve those sorts of results?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, food underpins everything. It underpins our physical health and our mental health, and it underpins our environment and the world around us. And it's a hugely powerful tool that we have to create a better future for everybody. And it's exciting to explore the many different ways that we can use food to do so. And that includes the application of innovative technologies to potentially address a myriad of issues, including in food insecurity.
Yeah. The other thing that did occur to me is this question, you know, you raised the topic of sort of sovereignty and autonomy. And one of the challenges, certainly with sort of the higher tech end of urban agritech, is this question of access. You know, when you look at some of these projects, they're quite, because they are closed, controlled environments, they limit the amount of access that people have to them, potentially. And so how do we make those technologies accessible to people? Is it through the kind of community supported agriculture model that you mentioned, or is there a way that we can get people more involved with those technologies directly?
Yeah, I think that's a really important and interesting point, and one that I'm sure our experts are going to have plenty to riff on. Certainly we want these technologies to be accessible. We want people to be able to engage with these innovative methods, and we want to make food growing visible. So yeah, absolutely. If it's just shut away behind closed doors and it's, you know, out of reach on the tops of buildings, then it's not really playing a significant role in addressing the issues. And so how we can bring that into the public forum and into the public space is a really important thing to figure out.
And I think as a follow-up to that, I guess, you know, and this is a big question for sure, but how does this kind of technology start to interact with other parts of these kind of food systems? So whether it's in the urban context, like sort of, you know, community gardening and those kind of ideas, and even out into the wider world, you know, the bigger food systems, I think we have to start thinking about how this one particular set of technologies is one tool in the toolbox, right? And that we have to hook up with all these other sectors and work out how to work with them to get the maximum benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly there's lots of ways to integrate all these different technologies. You can have a peri-urban farm that's doing lots of soil growing, but it also has perhaps a hydroponic or an aquaponic grow house as part of its farm. Or you could have you know, an underground mushroom farm that is part of a community project that's doing youth work, for example. So there's lots of ways to integrate grow systems into different parts of our communities. It's a very exciting potential.
And what's been your experience there? Because obviously you're working with this kind of youth engagement area and these engagement networks. Have you found that that's something that people are enthusiastic for? Is it something that they want? You know, are they expressing that to you in your work?
Absolutely. I mean, the application in education is huge. A lot of schools don't have the opportunity to grow food outside. Another problem with soil growing in schools is that they're at their most fruitful in the summer when the school is shut. So bringing these types of technology into the classroom is a really great way to engage kids in food growing all throughout the year. And schools are very, very enthusiastic about it. But again, it's about making it affordable and making the systems reasonably efficient so that they don't require too much upkeep. So there's lots of potential exciting work to be done with schools. And yes, most people are very enthusiastic about the idea.
Absolutely. Those two examples you gave from New York really paint a picture of how powerful this can be as a kind of educational tool.
It really is. And it's not just around food growing, it's about so much more. You can really explore issues of social justice. Again, you really are empowering young people to think with an entrepreneurial mindset, to look at how they can be the leaders and the creators of a much more of a much stronger food system, a food system that works for people in all different communities around the world and has low impact on our climate and on our planet. And education is an absolutely essential part of any social movement and of creating systemic change. So I think for me, and obviously this is why I set up Grown It, education is just a crucial thing if we're going to get our food system right.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, obviously we said at the beginning of this that we had to ask what we were doing this for and what we were trying to achieve. And, you know, once you know that, you have to tell people that. And that's essentially what education is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, that's a lovely point to end on, I think, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Florence, thanks so much for sharing your insights and experiences today.
Absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing many of you at the second part of this topic discussion.
Okay, thanks. And for our viewers, as Florence said, this is the first of a two-part session, and you can find the details of that below. Thank you all for being here and watching today, and goodbye.